special partnership and brought to you by Future Leader Now. Today at Soulfront, I'll be speaking with Mark Donnelly, who is the CFO of the Rohit group of companies, which is a home builder and designer that is well known throughout the prairies. In his past, Mark has been involved in private equity, and he started up ATB Capital, and he also sits on a number of boards. Mark is enthusiastic and loves engaged work cultures. So we explore what it takes to have an engaged culture and why it's so important. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Thanks so much for taking time to be a part of the show. I really appreciate it. Just want to, before we get into the conversation, just kind of want to set it up a little bit. Want to go into your passion about engaged workplaces. It's something that I also have a deep interest in, and we'll get into that. But before we do, what I'd like is for you to tell us a little bit about your past and your history, and then kind of weave in the idea of engaged workplaces. So, your background is in private equity. You were also integral in starting up ATB Capital, and more recently, you're the CFO of the Rohit Group. And there are a number of other boards and different things that you're up to. But could you go into that a little bit, and we'll start the conversation there?
For sure. I would say even my getting into private equity at a pretty young age is tied to a lot of other experience. I've worked on the oil rigs. I've laid concrete, so a lot of blue collar work. And then I had my own business doing bathroom renovations when I was about 21. And it was really that brought me back into more the professional white collar side of it, because I figured after running that business for a year, I should know what I'm doing. And in doing that, I went back and got my BCom, and through that, I ended up articling at PwC. And there's always been a common thread throughout my career path where I've kind of went from small company to big company to small company to big company. And you learn from both, the benefits of a bureaucracy and how certain processes, cultural values, communication work in big companies, and where it falls short. And then you also see on small companies the benefits of working closely with the owner, understanding where their corporate mindset is or where they want to take the business. But you also see the fall downs in some of the things that are lacking from a controls perspective, or efficiency of process, or repeatability of that business model. So I've always tried to take the best of both whenever I make that switch. And yeah, obviously, then I sit on volunteer on the board of Snow Valley, as well as founded a company, Converge Condo Management, with two other partners, and have a guy running it right now. And I just try to apply those learnings into each one of those situations and try to bring the best of both worlds to every company I kind of touch.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you look at workplace engagement, a funny statistic is out there, and that is it's between 60 to 80% of people in the workforce say they are disengaged, which I find unbelievable. That seems like a large number. And if you look at some of the statistics that are tied to it, so in the mental health space, there's a cost, and this is in Canada, it's $50 billion that is associated with mental health issues. If you went down a list, what these costs are made up of, 19% of absenteeism costs are due to workplace stress, 40% of turnover costs, 55% of employee assistance program costs, 60% of workplace safety incident costs, 10% of drug plan costs, and 100% of stress-related lawsuits.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are some of the reasons why this idea of having an engaged workplace matter. But to you, why does having an engaged workplace matter?
I guess I've seen it when you completely have some disengaged employees. And I mean, the costs you just stated are the measurables, right? There's immeasurables that would put that cost way higher. And I don't know if you have the stats in front of you, because I haven't looked at this in a while, but like there's actually a category called actively disengaged as well. And the analogy that someone told me once is, you have a soccer team of 9 people, essentially if you break down those stats, you have three people trying to score a goal. You have another five people, let's say, or four. Well, no, what was the actual stats? I think it was another four people who essentially were just standing on the field, not doing anything. And you actually have two people actively trying to score on your goal. So when you think of that, like business strategy, when you have people pulling the wrong direction, I mean, not only is that a cost of salary that's not doing anything, they're probably actually bringing other people down or removing a couple goals off your score sheet. So, yeah, I've seen it where I was doing a turnaround pretty early in my career, and you had a pretty hard-nosed entrepreneur at the helm, and they would basically pick up the phone with whatever issue popped into their head, and it was their perception that the individuals who answered that phone, and he said jump and they said how high, were the highest performing individuals. From my seat, I viewed those people as the worst performing employees, because they were essentially sitting around all day waiting for that call, and then when they got that call, they could jump as high as they wanted because they weren't doing anything else. And then the people who would receive that call and get frustrated with the owner were the ones who were actively trying to solve the business's problems from their perspective, which they're on the front line, they understand a little better, and they viewed the requests coming from the owners as a bit of a distraction. And they'd get around to it, but it wasn't their highest priority, and they knew that from their lens. So trying to educate the owner on that was difficult at times. But that was it. You had these disengaged people kind of sitting around. You had people actively trying to score, and it was just, you could see the dysfunction. So yeah, it happens. And I've also seen it the other way, where the team's all rowing in the right direction. And it's funny, the side effects of that. If you're trying to observe whether it's a hardworking culture, sometimes people look for stress, right, as a sign that people are working hard. And I find when the team's actually working well, you get better results, the team's happier, and everything seems to work. So yeah, it's fascinating. I think the lesson there is just be careful what you're measuring, right? Because you might not be reading the right rules.
How about with the difference between the smaller organizations and the or larger organizations, the why it's important for the two different types of businesses? Do you see differences between the two, or is it pretty much the same themes throughout?
There's definitely differences. Obviously, it's more challenging when you get into a bigger environment. Like, I would say most companies that I've ever been a part of that are greater than 1,000 employees, there's usually quite a bit of distrust between even middle management and executive management. So I think it's more difficult when you put those things up on a wall to really live by them. And if you're running a big organization, I would really take a look at what's on those walls and say, are we actually living by these? Because I think if you're not, it does so much damage to your culture. Whereas if you put them up and you actually live by them, then there's no difference between a big company and a small company. But it's harder to walk the walk in a big company because you've got different competing perspectives. You get a little bit of empire building going on here or there. We're a small company. It really doesn't matter. And I'll take a step back and tell you where I kind of came to this conclusion is when I first worked on the rigs, I was working on a little telescopic double. So for those listening that don't know what that is, it's a small rig. It pokes holes quickly and you move it quite frequently. You only had 5 guys on a crew, and then you'd have a day, a night, and a off, and there'd be a 3-shift rotation. Now in that, there was this quick hazing period where the guys would give you a hard time. And then they needed you as much as you needed them because it was very quick. It was a dangerous environment, stressful environment. Things were moving quick. I left that rig to a triple that was working up in Fort Nelson. And they'll drill a hole for 3 months. You don't move the rig. Sometimes the rate of penetration of drilling is very slow. So you don't even functionally do anything in a shift. You just watch the bit go down. You clean the rig. You fix what's broken. That's it. In there, the hazing period lasts forever, indefinitely, because the individuals don't actually need you as a team, right? So politics comes in. So what I learned is in situations where there's too many people, too many resources, politics, the negative side of bureaucracy comes out, which is politics, resource hoarding, gamesmanship. So, and I think there's a state of flow or a theory of state of flow. And I think some Aboriginal groups actually lived by this back in the day, where if they ever found themselves in a valley where it was providing too much, they would actually move the tribe to a place where resources were more scarce and people had to work together as a community, where if people didn't need each other, it became detrimental to the way their organizations worked. the same thing in my mind applies in organization. So if you're in an organization where politics are ripe, I think you have to look and say we're probably overstaffed or over-resourced.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was looking at a book by Amy Edmondson, which is Fearless Organizations. And she's
Yeah.
got this interesting kind of graphic which talks about high psychological safety, low psychological safety, low standards, high standards. So if you're high standards, high psychological safety, it seems to be a learning environment with high performance.
Mm-hmm.
If you are in a low psychological safety, high standards environment, it's that anxiety zone.
Yeah.
It's that where people are fearful to move and do things that might make sense, but could get them in trouble, not in terms of results, but in terms of politics, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the low psychological safety, low standards, which is basically, I'm not going to do anything. High psychological safety, low standards, where I'm comfortable, I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That
So
classic small business that probably won't grow much further. Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it, it's funny. I want to also go into actually a book that you talked to me about, and I read over the weekend here, and it's by Dan Cable, which is Alive at Work, and what he proposed was engaging what he called the seeking system, which is really play and curiosity at work while you're engaging and try to do some type of project. And what his hypothesis was is basically, if you are doing something that you love to do, there's not only just benefits, benefits to the work. There's actually biological benefits where there's dopamine that's kind of running through your brain. It's reinforcing you to do better and motivating you to do better.
Yeah.
But he keyed in on three topic areas. One was, these are the three things that you need to do to kind of engage that seeking system. One was self-expression. The other was experimentation, so experimenting at work. And the last one was personalized purpose. So making sure that there's purpose that's personalized to you. And when we talk about the small organization, large organization, I think your ability to do those things changes as well. But how, or what are the types of things that you've been able to do within organizations, or you've seen other people do in organizations, to engage the seeking system, to create increased motivation and engagement?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because it's difficult to overcome when it doesn't currently exist in the culture, right? And I think that's where I've done kind of a series of turnarounds where you have a small window of opportunity to do that. But I mean, essentially, first you have to create an objective or a goal, right? So if there is a turnaround situation, again, some of the times the situation is, we know the whole organization knows cost is too high. How do you cut costs? That takes away that psychological safety, and the seeking system kind of backfires on you to some extent. I'll maybe leverage my condo company, because they've done a pretty good job at that. Is we really had to identify what is our purpose, right? Like in condo management, it's a tricky one, because you're working with a bunch of different boards. Each one has a different view of what condo management services are, and how do you address each one of those. And if you just tried to map out a checklist of things you deliver, people could check those off and still have disappointment from the board, which doesn't give you any reward or dopamine back, obviously, if you're getting crapped on for something you thought you did right. So really what we had to define is, actually our purpose is just delivering peace of mind. So if they have a certain expectation, we just have to try to deliver them peace of mind, to say we're working in the best interest of your condo corporation, and we're trying to deliver that. So just a slight tweak of what we actually sell has allowed us to do that. And then it also allows that seeking system to be engaged on in the experimentation in all three of those categories, in the fact that, well, now that I know it's peace of mind, it's up to me to come up with that solution for this scenario, which may be different than that scenario. And it might be different than my colleague and how they might do it with the same person. So it gives that individual purpose. So you define the purpose, and then you let them experiment and figure out. But part of that is they're not always going to get it right, but that's part of experimentation, right? And as long as you have time and you have an individual who has a desire to learn, they'll get there, right? They'll experiment until they find out what works with their skill set, personality, and style, interfacing with, and then, you know what, then they'll meet another individual who's different, and that approach won't work. And then they have to experiment. So, you know, my view is we're all extremely flawed, and experimentation and patience and understanding is the only way that you eventually refine to figure out what actually works.
Yeah, I also find it interesting when I was reading the book, they talked about Google, and when Google started, they had 20% of the time devoted to experimentation.
Yeah.
And as it grew larger and you had to maintain different projects, different systems, what happened was it was just too much time that was
Yeah.
devoted to large projects. At least this is what Google found. So they changed the percentage, but they still had that space for experimentation. And entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial companies that are startups seem to have more time for play, and that's what helps them be innovative. Have you experienced kind of the same thing when looking at private equity and in businesses and looking at larger businesses growing out and their ability to still be creative?
Yeah, I mean, like, so Google would be the definition of that creativity to some extent, right? And all the innovation that's been off of it, and even the innovation in how they assess teams. And there's a lot of literature on that and how they actually tried to come up with the ideal teams. I think culture can't be, it's not a one size fits all. Even engaging that sequence system is different in how you do it in one business versus the other. And I think, you know, that 20% time, I think as a business gets more evolved and it understands what its purpose is in the ecosystem, you have to become more efficient at delivering that system. So even within Google, like, I'm sure there's accounts payable people, or that's a very process oriented job. Like, do you need creativity there? Yeah, probably. You still do need a little bit, but it should be focused on making that process I'm operating more efficient, not, you know, blue sea thinking of what's the new phone we're going to come out, or is phone even the next thing, or is it a chip in your head, you know? So I think in any business, depending on where it is, I think you could even look back to, you know, the old charts as far as, you know, a startup versus the cash cow, and how different investment. I think at the beginning you've got two. You've got more time because you're still trying to figure out your business cycle, and you've got more time in between transactions when you're starting a business up, and you're getting feedback constantly from those transactions to improve. But it gets into diminishing marginal returns to some extent in receiving that feedback and altering your process. And also, if you've done a good job doing that, your transactions will increase and you'll have less time as a business, and you'll have more time just servicing the customer. So I think, you know, as that applies to private equity, when you're evaluating a business, like, understanding where they are in that cycle, and you've got to fix costs and labor to some extent. So how do you maximize that if your transactions are sparse to increase your transactions in the future? You know, and if you're buying a business that has a ton of capacity in between transactions from a private equity standpoint, understand you have fixed costs here, and you should invest that fixed cost into more innovation and R&D. And that might be a better alternative than shaving that fixed cost just to match your transactions, because then that stems or stifles your growth in the future.
Mm-hmm. Another angle to look at this is those organizations that kind of fall down on culture and having engaged culture and engaged workplaces. And I looked at an article in Psychology Today, and they said these are 6 clear reasons why employees are disengaged.
Yeah.
And they talked about people being, one, overwhelmed. The second one was poor communication. Another one was, I'm scared. I don't see the big picture. There's no accountability. And then the last one, I like it. Leaders don't face reality. But I mean, with all of those, what do you see when you see disengaged work cultures?
So, you mentioned 6 things. I heard one: communication, right? Like, if someone's overwhelmed, talking to them can help, right? And say, I know you've got a ton of stuff going on, but listen, sitting there is not going to do anything. Let's just grab one brick at a time, right? And then, so the wall seems unrealistic. That was the last one, but a brick at a time seems very realistic. So me talking to my leader has understood that. So to me, communication's everything on engagement. Like a video clip, I guess that would resonate is that Apollo 13, where they're running out of oxygen, and there's a square filter and a round filter, and they say, hey, this is all we need to put this hole into this square peg, or vice versa, with all of this. And he dumps all this tools and supplies that the astronauts would have, right? And they come up with it, right? Like that sounded like an impossible task. They solved it. It worked, right? So, that would be very overwhelming. Oh my God, people could die, right? But the reality is like, okay, break it down, scope it out, communicate clearly. This is what the objective is, and then let your people innovate and come up with it, and then support them. So, communication is very important. And I forget which communication book it's in, but they said the biggest fallacy about communication is the fact that people think it exists. So, and then the next sentence is green cup. And then when I say that, an image pops into your head. So what image popped into your head?
With green cup, green screen.
Sure. Right. So like the most common answer I get on that is like a red Solo cup that's green. Right. But I could be talking about a dark green coffee mug, my kid's neon green little drinking cup. So 2 words, you clearly heard them, yet you and others will come up with totally different images in their head. Right. And they're very concrete words. So when we start talking about concepts like business strategy, and like these are very difficult concepts to grasp. And then you also have a whole bunch of people with different backgrounds and training, right? So an accountant saying net income, someone else might interpret that as revenue, right? And those are 2 totally different things. So it's the background of our experiences which forge the images in our head. But if we take something like as simple as green cup and realize we're on different pages, there's no way we're even in the same book when we're talking about business concepts, let alone in the same chapter, let alone on the same page, let alone within the same sentence. So the only way we get close in business, specifically interdepartmentally, is reverberation. So I need to communicate, you need to paraphrase, I need to recommunicate, no, that's not what I meant, and back and forth. So to me, communication creates engagement because it breaks down a lot of barriers that are just natural to how we interact with each other. And without it, you're swimming upstream, right? And it's very impossible. So communication, I think, solves all 6 of those things. But it's how you communicate as well that would make it very important. And then again, the challenges, small company versus big company. I find that if the executive team in a big company is not connected or not on the same page, each level that message goes down, it's exponentially different, right? It's a telephone game to some extent, where small companies, the risk of that message getting diluted or spread differently is smaller. So the same challenge exists. The risk is just higher in a big company.
I find that very interesting because lots of companies that I've interacted with or I've worked for, they will have their top 10 list of values, right? I've got this article from the Globe and Mail, and it says, this is back in 2014, the 5 factors to make your corporate culture effective. And I just love these. It's I read it and I just thought, God, this is just like this is basically those posters on the back of the wall that companies put up and nobody pays attention to or thinks they mean anything. So here they are: consistent communication, celebrate success, be transparent, respect everyone's contribution, continually benchmark your performance.
Yeah.
So okay, here's a quote by Sheryl Sandberg. So she's the CEO of Facebook, and she wrote Lean In.
Yeah.
And I think she said it best. She says, presenting leadership a list of carefully defined qualities like strategic, analytical, performance-oriented no longer holds. Instead, true leadership stems from individuality that is honest and sometimes imperfect. Leaders should strive for authenticity over perfection.
Yeah.
Can you take from your experience and apply kind of what I've just said?
Well, I think where it applies mostly is providing feedback to staff and otherwise, right? Anyone, actually, to tell you the truth. And a very similar line of thought I've heard is like, the only proper way to give feedback is be genuine. So there's these formulas of, you did this in this specific scenario. It made me feel like all this conflict avoidance type language, and then, leave them with the takeaway. And I find that formula works great when you're genuine. It works horribly and it backfires horribly when you're not being genuine. And also not using that formula when you're genuine is very valid too. So I find just genuinely interacting with people, and it's something we forget, right? I think you take these corporate rules that were designed for industrial revolution type times, and they just don't work, right? And what works is being human, acknowledging other people are human, setting a great goal for the organization, whatever that might be, and working together to solve it, right? I think at the end of the day, we actually live in a very unique time where I think you have this opportunity as a business leader to engage people, because they're so disengaged in their personal lives, right? With technology the way it is, like there's this whole isolation stuff that was existing before COVID-19, right? Where people felt isolated despite having a gazillion friends on Facebook and all these Instagram followers, because they had a broad range of friendships, but their depth in any one was eroding, right? So I found at work, it was a place where you could actually create that meaning again, make people feel better about being at work than at home, because I think intrinsically we all want to solve puzzles. But we also have to feel safe in solving those puzzles and know we can go after it. So I don't know if I avoided or answered your question there.
No. I think that, a part of it also in that you're hitting on is leaders have to step up and embody those things on the wall. And those things on the wall.
So things on the wall might be one thing. I was at a conference one time where they said, you know what? Think about the position you're currently trying to hire for. Okay. They said, you have it in your head? Yep. Okay. Write down the top 5 qualities of that individual you'd want, that your ideal candidate, not technical, just like qualities of that individual. Right. So, I mean, a lot of people would be like punctual, always shows up on time, grateful, gives more than they take, whatever, right? Whatever the list is. And they said, okay, turn it over. Then he went on to talk for a while. And then he said, okay, turn that paper over again. Do you do any of these things? And it says, if you don't do any of these things, you're never going to be able to hire and retain that person, because they're going to be better than you essentially. And they're going to say, I'm not getting anything else in a relationship. So, if these are the qualities you want in people, start living them. And you'll attract those people, right? So to your point about leaders stepping up, I think, yeah, like and that maybe ties into unrealistic expectations. Like, you want me to live this way, but clearly you don't. So now I've been reinforced that's an impossible way to live, or at least you're not living that way. So it's, again, disproportionate. So yeah, I don't know. Leaders do have to step up if they want a good culture. They have to drive it.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the idea of psychological safety. And the only place where we're able to create these engaged workplaces or places where you feel like you can be your authentic self. Like, you're not going to get those leaders in place unless you have that feeling like it's okay to think outside the box, to experiment, to be yourself and in your best way. So what do you see right now with cultures and companies when we're distanced and we still want to create that positive culture? Like, what are the different types of things that you're trying to do?
Yeah, so we're doing a few things, right? I guess, like, from a distance perspective, obviously a lot of this video conference, and actually more, like, historically when it used to be a phone call, now it's a video conference. So I guess, like, it's increased the communication on that side. As a culture, we're doing What's Up Wednesdays, where we just give a State of the Union to some extent, and it's more informal, so it's not really a town hall, but just we have one group present what they're working on. And then there's just a general kind of chat session after, and everyone can catch up, ask questions, and see what's going on. It's difficult, right? I don't think you get the full impact of it just being virtual, but the frequency of which we're doing it is more than we would if we were in person, right? The other thing we're doing is, I would say at Rohit Group of Companies, we historically had a very young, active office, and I would say in doing that, we had a lot of run-in points, like water cooler talks, lunch, and that is how information passed throughout the organization. it doesn't happen when we're all away like this, right? You have to be very intentful with how you're communicating and who you're running into. So we've tried to structure a rhythm of meetings between different groups, specifically obviously given the other side effects of COVID-19 and uncertainty in revenues on a go forward basis. Cash flow management's huge, right? So the finance group is much more in contact with operations to understand, which way the wind's blowing, which will help us sensitize our forecast to say, ooh, this guy didn't sound too confident in his ability to, so let's discount that, right? Or actually things are going really well in this region, so maybe we don't need to dial back our risk assessment that high and we can lean into it a bit. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing, is just more structured rhythm of meetings and being more intentful about our run-ins with each other to say, actually, you know what, I haven't ran into you for a couple of weeks. Like, we need to touch base, just hear what's going on in your department.
Mm-hmm. Mark, hey, I want to end the conversation on this. I want you to finish this final thought. There's something about psychological safety, communication, and innovation.
How would I follow that up? I would say everything's about that, right? We live in a world that's a knowledge economy. If you don't have that psychological safety, you're not going to get the innovation, right? You're not going to get the communication. People are going to hold back. And just to wrap it up, I guess the book you referenced that I had talked to you is Alive at Work, and there's a concept in there called learned helplessness, and its very simplest form. It's, I say, hey Scott, I got an idea. These Soulfront things, great. They could be improved by doing X, and you say, Mark, thanks for coming on the show. I don't pay you to give me ideas. And it's, boop, okay. You don't care, I don't care, right? And that happens in a business all the time. I guess I don't pay you to think, whatever, right? So people bring you ideas, acknowledge the idea, discuss the idea with them to see, vet it out. And even if you don't think it's a good idea at the end, you showed you paid attention to it, they feel they were heard, and they will bring you the next idea. That might be a good one. If you just dismiss it and you don't explain why you're dismissing it, or they don't feel like they've been heard, they're going to stop bringing those ideas, and they're going to be the individuals sitting in their office waiting for you to give them a call in a project, and they'll jump, and it'll seem like they respond to you well, but they've stopped doing anything on their own, innovating, creating, and helping out the business through their lens. So
that's nice.
That's how it ended.
I like that. That's great. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. This is fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.